Hi everyone, my name is Conor Heffernan and it's a great pleasure to be presenting here. Don't worry, I'm safe. It's just a background. I'm safe. Now, today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, but I think hopefully worthwhile. I'm going to be looking at the deployment of the zombie metaphor when it comes to smartphone usage and arguing for a more politically engaged use of that metaphor. Now, to make that seem a little bit simpler and not seem like I'm full of myself and full of BS, what I'm arguing today is that historically the zombie metaphor, when it comes to technology use, has been used as part of a moral panic to critique, criticize, or problematize the use of technology. What I'm going to be arguing today, hopefully forcefully, is that we can use a deployment of the zombie metaphor in a way that is politically engaged and sheds light on the weaponization of social media and technology in the modern age. So what I'm going to do to begin is to show you, and I think in a very interesting way, how fears around zombies and technology have existed for quite some time. So, in the build up to this research, I did a huge sweep of American news sources from the 2000s up to the 2020s and found wonderful ideas and fears dating back to 2012, well, dating back to 1970, but we'll go into that, around, the zombie smartphone apocalypse, children being urged not to look at their phones and being mindless zombies on the pavement. Some countries uh, critiquing or considering the use of smartphone only lanes. So all the smartphone zombies can go into one place so that they're not going to be bumping into others. And people trying to avoid going into quote unquote zombie mode because their smartphone has taken over their lives, taken over their agency, and taken over their engagement with the world. So why is this the case? Now, what I'm going to do in this presentation is two things. First, I'm going to look at the deployment of the zombie when it comes to technology writ large, and then look at how we can reuse or reappropriate that metaphor in a way that is engaging. So, in the first instance, I think it is fair to say that at a Theorizing Zombie conference, most people presenting and viewing will be comfortable with the entire backstory of the zombie metaphor. So, I'm going to avoid talking about Haitian folklore, Haitian mythology, the move from the zombie, going back to the 1920s, 1930s, etc. I feel like as an audience, we're comfortable with this. So what I want to do is actually begin not in the 1920s, not about, Seabrook's Magic Island or any of these things, but rather begin in the 1970s in America. In 1977, Marie Wynne publishes a groundbreaking work for its time called The Plug-in Drug. Entirely focused on the medium of television, Wynn's argument is very simple. Television in America has undergone a rapid shift from the previously educational or at least conservatively safe content that was being published in the 19 or shown in the 1950s and the 1960s. Television in the 1970s was now far more salacious. There was now more violence on screen, meatier topics, more political topics, more critical topics. American television was moving closer and closer to the medium that would maybe reach an apogee in the 1990s of the sort of car crash TV, at least in Marie Wynn's telling. Now, The Plug-in Drug is a cultural success. It is one of those books that seems to capture the concerns in American media and American public life around what technology is doing, especially to children and adolescents. Why I'm talking about the plug-in drug is that Marie Wynne settles on a term that she believes characterizes perfectly the problem of television in the modern age. It was producing television zombies. Television zombies were viewers who were experiencing an altered state of consciousness characterized by shutdown mechanisms, blankly looking at the screen, loss of critical thinking. Oh, I saw this on TV, it must be true. Um, Difficulty re-engaging with reality. Thus began this wave of both academic and lay conversations around the impact that television was having on people's brains and people's consciousness. And taken in its totality, such research and such conversations and moral panics, if we're to go so far, sort of centered on four key symbols, that being a mindlessness on the part of the consumer, person viewing the television, aesthetic decay of television content, rootlessness on the part of the viewer, and an insatiable consumption for more without satisfaction. Now, this idea that television was making, as MIT research during the 1980s showed, viewers more object than subject, was also paired later in the 1980s and 1990s with terms like couch potato, describing people as vegetable-like objects, and a reoccurring theme is this idea of it's hard to tell if people are alive or dead when they're watching the television, or they're, quote, just glued to the tube, as one social commentator commented in 1975. Now, the idea of television turning people into television zombies was a powerful one, and it existed well into the 1990s. And indeed, some zombie films play with this idea of the impact of television. Now, television zombies do become outplaced or outdated in the 1990s with the advent of the internet for the general public within the United States. I am accepting, of course, that internet the popularity of the internet in the 1990s in America was unevenly distributed. It tended to be coordinated in small pockets around the country, not everyone had access, etc. But still, with all of those caveats, the term digital zombies did emerge in the 1990s to describe the advent of this new technology and to quote some University of Sydney research from the time, the preoccupation, the withdrawal from society, the lack of tolerance, and the loss of control that was creating what one person identified as a digital zombie generation. Now, this idea that the internet was making people zombie-like was again a highly powerful motif in the 2000s, in particular, as computer ownership and access to the internet grew across American society. And again, it was this concern with the lack of agency. And there's a wonderful Ellen Mortella study, pardon me, which documents the overwhelming similarity in research concerns across film in the first half of the 20th century, radio and television, which argues that the same concerns exist with roughly the same technology. And it is very difficult to dispute this idea. Now, when we move in, and sorry, it's historical trends and research on children, in case anyone is interested. When we move into the smartphone generations of the 2010s, we do have, as I've shown, the exact same concerns. Smartphones are making people, you know, they're zooming out of life. The smartphone zombies is one that I absolutely love. This concern, I don't know if anyone remembers, but, it was meant to be people walking like this, and bumping into people on the pavement or on the sidewalk, and that this was leading to concerns and that this new technology was again stripping people of their agency. Now, this is not to hand wave away concerns about technology and the impact that social media and smartphone uses has had in the social and cultural and indeed political life, which we'll be talking about in a few moments' time, but rather to say that the discourses around these things remain largely the same. There is a new technology, it is stripping people of their agency, and no real solutions are going to be had around this topic. It's just that the zombie works particularly well when talking about the lack of agency among people. Now, there are some interesting critiques that obviously we can give of that. We can talk about the fact that serious leisure, so exercising, reading, painting, all of these things, is seen as acceptable leisure, but mindless consumption is seen as problematic leisure, and we can't have people engaged in problematic leisure. We can also talk about the disparity when it comes to the children and ageist beliefs around what is acceptable for children and adolescents, and then also there's some racial concerns within that. But what I want to do first is just make it very clear that the zombie metaphor has been used in conjunction with technology for a very long period of time. Now, what I want to do is talk about how we can actually use that metaphor in interesting and important ways. Because I think if we were to accept that the zombie metaphor has already been attached to technology, what I would suggest is that the nascent body of research, which is politicizing that zombie metaphor in a smartphone and social media age, is actually rather important. And what I'm going to do is begin by talking about, pardon me, a wonderful study that was I'm just trying to find my notes here, pardon me. A wonderful study that was conducted in 2018, which looked at the spread of misinformation through the use of the zombie metaphor. Because there are three ways in which I think we can politicize the zombie metaphor in interesting ways. The first is the spread of disinformation in social and political life. The second is the use of deep fakes as reanimated corpses and the problems and ethics of engaging as that. And the third is looking at bots as digital zombies when it comes to the spread of misinformation. So in a wonderful article in 2010, Jack McLean talked about how the zombie can be used to talk about US culture and the increasing proliferation of mindlessness within US culture. Now, it's written from a more conservative lens, but we're going to use it for our own purposes today. When we look at the spread of misinformation in uh, in the real world, for want of a better phrase, the zombie metaphor and the idea of the horde works particularly well. In one study from 2018, so after the 2016 election and then after obviously the Brexit vote in the UK, the zombie metaphor was used to look at that horde amplification and the replication of fake news within the digital space. And what is the driving agent within that is the use of algorithmically defined or algorithmically used data. When you talk about how algorithms influence people's content on social media, and when you talk about how people are putting their thumb on the scale to influence what stories get repeated and what do not get repeated, the thing that is often missing from that is a more critical observation of the algorithm itself. The algorithm, much like the zombie, is mindless. The algorithm, the technology which drives content and engagement and clicks within social media, is created at a certain point and is then set forth into the world to spread and become more powerful. What the algorithm in a social media context drives forward and backwards and left and right, etc., is not a conscious decision, but it is drawn by an insatiable need for engagement. There is a way in using the zombie metaphor or the zombie horde to look at how technology is being spread in these interesting ways. Now, the next area that I think is a useful redeployment of the zombie metaphor is obviously in this newer sense of reanimated corpses or reanimating public figures to utter fabricated statements. These are hollow simulations. You may have seen it. Elon Musk famously retweeted a clip that accused USAID of paying Hollywood stars to promote Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader, that was viewed millions and millions of times after Elon Musk boosted it. There have been numerous examples of both positive deepfakes. One of the co-founders of Reddit had a deepfake of his like mother hugging him as a child, something that he didn't have any videos of, and he reanimated this as a video. But then we have politically engaged deepfakes. Musk, Zelensky, reanimated fakes, pardon me, depicting Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, etc. These are zombie lifelike corpses spreading false statements within this digital space. The third element that I think we need to look at, which is connected to both deepfakes and the spread of misinformation, are obviously social bots. Social bots can be redeployed as sort of undead soldiers of disinformation networks. They are automated, they are repetitive, and they are devoid of reason. Studies from 2016 to 2020 show bots disproportionately amplify low credibility content, especially in political contexts. So, as we look at the zombie metaphor and the zombie motif in the social media age, what we need to consider is how are we deploying this metaphor? Can we lazily just repeat this idea of, well, people are mindless and people are people are connected to their phones and they're not paying attention and they have low agency now and they're just grunting when they should be talking to us, etc., etc. Or can we actually do something in a way that redeploys and uses the zombie metaphor in an interesting way that can poke holes and shed light on these individual actors and on these individual problems, which are problems for our democracies, for our sense of political trust, and for our sense of what to do. So while the zombie highlights a loss of critical thought, an erosion of trust, and invisible hands guiding the mob, these are things, pardon me, that we see in modern social and political life. It is found in election interference, anti-science rhetoric, and indeed in political propaganda. The metaphor of the zombie underscores how democracies can be overwhelmed, not by ideas, but by volume, repetition, and the technological mimicry of legitimacy. The zombies are already here. They scroll, they share, they don't check the source. But when we think about what can be done, there are avenues in which I think we can use the zombies as an antidote. We can use the zombies to talk about media literacy. We can redefine algorithms as zombies and have conversations about transparent algorithms. We can use the zombie as a metaphor to talk about the regulation of AI generated content. And certainly we can use the zombie as a metaphor for human gatekeeping in public discourse, especially in online spaces. So we are currently in the zombie internet, not in the way that many public discourses about it are found. I think it's lazy, and I think it's, kind of a very low-hanging fruit to talk about smartphone zombies. But I think what we need to start doing is thinking about the technology itself as a zombie, as opposed to the user. So on that note, thank you so much for your time and attention. Please do reach out to let me know your comments, thoughts, and concerns, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.